Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. I see a lot of familiar names, so to those of you that have been here before, welcome back. And I see some new names on my participant board, so I'm glad to see that you're here as well, too. This is a webinar about Lyme disease, and every time is a little bit different, and that's because it's created by your questions. So the way that you participate is write questions to me, and you can do so by over here in your chat box. Over here on the bottom right-hand side is a chat box, and what you can do is write your question to me there. The only thing I ask is that you don't hit the enter key until the whole question is done. Each time that you hit the enter key, it actually creates a separate question, which makes it very difficult on my side to follow what's going on. While we're doing the webinar tonight, I will post your questions on the screen so that you can see it live. Most people are able to see it when I do that. In the recorded version, though, those questions will not show up. So what I'll be doing in the recorded version, so for the sake of the recorded version, that is, I'll be actually reading the questions before I actually answer them tonight, too. Okay. So this is a webinar tonight. We have another one next week, and then that will be it for a couple weeks. Okay, so we have tonight and next Thursday night. I am creating a recording of tonight's webinar. As best as I can, I'll try to have that ready and out to you through an email describing that it's ready somewhere around 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. Okay. Now, sometimes the editing tools that I use through Google don't work quite right. So sometimes I get these things out to you just a little bit later than I had anticipated. But look for an email somewhere around 9 to 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. And in there, you'll have information about how, with links to watch the recording of tonight's webinar, and also to sign up for the webinar next week as well, too. Okay. Now, if for some reason you don't get the email, there's various places you can actually see the video recording tomorrow. One is on the homepage of treatlyme.net. That's the URL for Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD, my Lyme disease education site. The other place you can find it is at my store on the front page at treatlyme.com. Those are two places to look for it. I always load the videos up on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/treatlyme. And you'll be able to see it there, or you could go to my YouTube channel as well, too. Okay, so there's various places. So if you don't get that email, just realize you'll be able to watch it anyhow. All right. So tonight we'll take as many questions as possible. I just want to let you know at the beginning here, I am pooped already. It's been a long day here. I hope we can do the hour and a half, but we'll see how I'm feeling. It might be a little bit of a shortened version if I'm not able to. We'll see where I am at about an hour. Okay, I'll see if I'm up for going for a whole hour and a half of questions tonight or not. So let's go ahead and take the first question here. All right, so this is from Thomas. Let's see. Hi, Thomas. Let's see. Hope you are well, Dr. Ross. I have been treating Lyme mostly herbally for the past 2 years with some improvement, but my gut health has become worse. After testing with GI map, I have multiple infections such as C. diff, H. pylori, SIBO, Mycosporidium, and a parasite. My doctor investigated the C. diff with additional testing, and it still shows this time with only toxin A and not B. I do not have the typical symptoms like diarrhea, but my stool is loose and not formed for the last 8 months. He wants me to try a round of Difficid to see because my gut pain has worse after treating SIBO with rifaximin. Could C. diff be an issue and need to be treated in my case? The other option is to try itraconazole for yeast because I do not tolerate nystatin or diflucan. Okay, so let me just describe the kind of things that can give a person a lot of gassiness and bloating, okay? So, and one of those is when a person has a lot of gassiness and bloating, it can be due to an imbalance of good bacteria in the intestines, okay? And there's a number of things that could lead to that imbalance. One is having too many yeast growing in the intestines, okay? So from having been on antibiotics for a while, what happens is people can knock down good bacteria that compete with yeast in the intestines. And that can then lead to yeast overgrowth. Too many yeast living in the intestines leads to gassiness and bloating. Okay, so that's one thing, all right? Second thing that can lead to a lot of gassiness and bloating is just not even having yeast overgrowth, but just not having the right balance of good, healthy bacteria, all right? And that's because those good, healthy bacteria are needed to help with food digestion and detoxification, removing things we're allergic to. And if they happen to have gotten knocked down, that can be a problem as well, too. Okay. All right. Third thing that can happen sometimes that can lead to a lot of ongoing gassiness and bloating is specific infections. One would be having C. difficile. So C. difficile is a bacteria that lives in our intestines, and that bacteria lives there all the time. But when we're on antibiotics, it tends to grow. It could grow too much while we're on antibiotics, leading to the release of a toxin, that C. difficile toxin A that you talked about, for instance. Okay, and those toxins lead to looseness of the stool as well too. Okay, all right. Next thing that can lead to a lot of gassiness and bloating is having the wrong kind of bacteria living in your small intestines. Okay, so there's our food pipe, connects to the stomach, then the stomach leads to the small intestines, and then somewhere down around the appendix, the small intestines join the large intestines. And there's a valve called the ileocecal valve that is supposed to keep things that are supposed to be in the large intestines, not going back up into the small intestines, all right? And so, but what happens in some people is they wind up getting bacteria that's supposed to live in the small or the large intestines, working its way back up into the large intestines. And that can then lead to gassiness and bloating as well too, all right? Finally, the last thing that can give a lot of gassiness and bloating is having intestinal parasites. And intestinal parasites can be really hard to see. In some people, they're hard to actually see when we try to look at them in the lab. There's been studies done looking at how useful we are at actually being able to detect them when we look under the microscope. And the range of the studies show that in some studies, they're accurately found when we look at them under the lab and the microscope 20% of the time. And some studies say that we're only able to detect, or we can only find them 20% of the time, that is. And some studies say that we can detect them up to 80% of the time. So our testing is not that good, okay? And so sometimes when there is the possibility of intestinal parasites, sometimes in my practice when I was in Seattle, if I really thought there was a high possibility of intestinal parasites, I might just try a parasite treatment to see if that would take care of the issue. Okay. All right. Now, because I am not licensed here in Texas, I cannot tell you specifically what to do. That would be called giving you a treatment. Okay. And they would call that practicing medicine without a license. But I can describe things that I would work through with somebody in this kind of a situation. Okay. All right. So number one, what I would do if I had a patient that had this kind of a situation is I would want to make sure that they had a foundation of getting good probiotics in. And I would probably work with one, which is a soil-based probiotic. Soil-based probiotics are ones that actually come from the ground. Okay. And they actually promote the healthy bacteria that normally live in our intestines to work better, okay? And these soil-based probiotics may actually gain a foothold in the intestines as well, too. The other advantage to them is because they are not temperature dependent. You can leave them out of the refrigerator, no problem at all there. They don't need to be refrigerated. And they seem to do a good job of getting through the gut into the intestines, okay? So one thing I always like to do with my patients, make sure they're taking at least 2 to 4 of those one time a day. When I'm also considering if somebody might have a problem with a C. difficile, the other thing that can be helpful is to be on a probiotic that's useful for treating C. difficile, because there are studies that show it can help decrease C. difficile, and that is to be on a bacteria called Saccharomyces boulardii, and that's or Sacro B for short, okay? And that's a yeast, actually. It's a healthy yeast that lives in our intestines, not like Candida yeast, which is not healthy, all right? And the thing to do with that would be to take a couple pills to 4 pills one time a day. And they can actually be taken at the same time as the core biotic, okay? So when there's the possibility of C. diff, and also there is a possibility of bacteria imbalance from having been on antibiotics for a long time, one of the things I would do with my patients is work with those 2 probiotics, okay? All right, then the other thing I might do in a situation like this, especially if you've been treated for SIBO before, is I would want to make sure it's gone. And there is a breath test that your doctor can do with you to see, is there still SIBO there or not, okay? All right, now, I don't know where you are in terms of what you've done with probiotics, but in a situation like this, I might just try to get the SIBO test and work with good probiotics to support the intestines for about a month to 2 months and see where I am. Okay. In a situation like this, I don't know that I would right away go to another antibiotic like this Difficid that your physician's talking about. Okay. So those are just some thoughts for you. I know I haven't given you a detailed plan because I can't. Okay. But those are some foundation ideas that you may want to take a look at. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Thomas. I'm going to just show you a few things here to look at too. And this is for you and for anyone that wants to look at this. All right. All right. So this is my website called Treat Lyme. Okay. And in terms of where you might want to look, take a look at my chapter on stomach and intestines. Okay. And here, for instance, if you're trying to figure out what you should do if you might have a parasite, take a look at this article, When and How to Treat Parasites in Lyme Disease, okay? For ideas on what to do for C. difficile that I was just talking about, you could take a look at that article. For ideas on what to do about too many yeast, you could take a look at these articles right here, okay? And then for the article about how I suggest using probiotics to maintain good gut health, including Sacro B, including soy-based probiotics, I would take a look at this article right here called Probiotics and Lyme Treatment. Okay? All right. All right, Thomas, good luck to you. Hello, SJ. Let's see if Lyme and Bartonella are caught very early during initial infection, tick bite with bullseye. Will the 8 weeks of doxy prescribed for Lyme eliminate the Bartonella as well? Also, do mold binders like charcoal bind food too? Thanks. Okay. So in terms of charcoal is a binder. Okay. So it can bind up fatty substances. All right. So could charcoal, if you take it with food at the same time as food, could it bind some of the fats in your diet? Yeah, it could. Probably not to a degree that it's going to lead to any dietary deficiencies, but it would mainly be fat-based things, okay? Not your vitamins, but just fat-based things, okay? All right. And then in terms of doxycycline, so one of the frontline antibiotics that is recommended when somebody has a tick bite is doxycycline. All right. And it's recommended for a few reasons. Number one, it treats Lyme. It can treat a couple of the ways that Lyme lives in you. But secondly, it does a good job of treating a number of the co-infections, other germs that you could pick up from that tick bite. And those would be things like Bartonella, Babesia, could be Ehrlichia, Anaplasma. All right. Now, early on, if you're treating, if you haven't developed chronic Lyme, and if you haven't developed chronic Bartonella, and you haven't developed chronic Babesia, in an acute setting, my experience is that doxycycline by itself is enough to keep Bartonella from becoming chronic and to keep Babesia from becoming chronic, and to wipe out Ehrlichia and Anaplasma as well too. Okay, in an acute setting. So to answer that question, the majority of time, 8 weeks of doxycycline would be enough to take care of Bartonella and Babesia alone. All right. Now, many of you know that when somebody has chronic Lyme, meaning it's been in them for a while, and they have a co-infection of Bartonella or of Babesia, in those situations, I usually recommend that a person take two things, two antimicrobials, whether they're prescription or herbal, to get rid of a Bartonella or to get rid of Babesia, okay? But my opinion is, and my experience is, in an acute setting, usually doxycycline by itself would be enough to keep those, to wipe those out, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, and Anaplasma, and you would not need to be on a second antibiotic for any of those, okay? All right. Thanks for the question, SJ. Hello, Trevor. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Expanding my question last week about being Igenix Lyme negative, but Babesia, Rickettsia, and Bartonella positive. I didn't mention that I have been taking grapefruit seed extract with the doxycycline. I have been on the 2 for 4 months, and not once did I herx or have any adverse reactions. I'm also from California and never traveled anywhere within a year of my symptoms starting. Are these clues that lead to me possibly not having Lyme? Also, for the duration of this illness, I have had really bad motility gastroparesis-like issues. Have you seen this as common with Babesia or possibly Lyme? I also have followed the Trifortify Anti-Factor Methogard for months now, and seems to be the only change I've noticed in my ability to be active. So thank you for that too. Thank you again so much for your continued efforts in helping this find a relief. Okay, thanks, Trevor. So let me make a few comments here. So Trevor was taught in the Trifortify Anti-Factor and Methylguard. I think he's using those for various things that he's discovered in my book. Okay, but at the Treat Lyme site. Methylguard is something that is used to help with a condition called MTHFR detoxification problems. If you're wondering if you might have that or what Methylguard is, I'll show you an article that you can look at that here in a minute. Okay. The Anti-Factor and Trifortify are two things that I suggest for people that are trying to repair the energy factories found in their cells called mitochondria. When we have chronic infections, sometimes the oxidation agents that get released by the immune system can damage our cell membranes, but also can damage the membranes of the energy factories found in our cells called mitochondria. And those two things, the Trifortify and Anti-Factor, can be part of a way of repairing the energy factories called mitochondria to give more energy. Okay, so I just want to come on that. I will show you both of those articles here in a minute. Actually, I need to write this down so I don't forget to show you what I'm talking about with that. So mitochondria and MTHFR. Okay, now back to the main part of your question. So last week, Trevor had presented a question, and as I remember it, because it's 1 week ago, okay, but was that he had some testing that showed that he had Babesia and Rickettsia and Bartonella, as he mentions here. And he was wondering if he could still have Lyme or not have Lyme too, okay? And his testing for Lyme had been negative, as I remember, all right? So what I had said last week, and I'll mention again, is that when you have evidence of a number of infections that can be transmitted by a tick, like the Bartonella, the Rickettsia, and Babesia, it increases the likelihood that Lyme is there as well too. It just increases the chances, okay? And it had been my standard of practice when I was working in Seattle managing Lyme disease. Because of that increased likelihood, I always tried to cover for the possibility of Lyme by having a person take at least two things that would cover the various forms of the germ. All right, so the forms of the germ are the spirochete, that's the corkscrew looking thing. Lyme also can morph into a microscopic cyst form, and then Lyme lives inside and outside of cells. So you need to be on at least two antibiotics that will take care of all of those states and conditions. Okay, so doxycycline treats Lyme that lives inside of cells and outside of cells, and also treats the spirochete form of the germ. And the grapefruit seed extract that Trevor was just mentioning is useful to treat the cyst form of the Lyme germ. Okay, all right. So, Trevor, unfortunately, let me see what your question was here. So I don't know, Trevor, as to whether you truly have Lyme or not. I can't say by what you're describing here. I can't say by what you described last week as well. And even if I could, even in these, I can't diagnose because I'm not licensed as a physician here in Austin, Texas. And so I can't tell you if you have it or not. Besides, I couldn't diagnose without examining you anyhow, okay? What I can relay to you is that if there are enough symptoms that look like Lyme, in a situation where you have many other infections that can be transmitted by tick bite, my practice and my belief is there still is a high probability of Lyme. And so my practice in similar situations in Seattle was to cover for it, okay? So to see if you have a lot of, so your chances of having Lyme go up with having symptoms that suggest Lyme. And so you might want to take a look at like Horowitz's a Lyme symptom checklist and see, do you have a lot of those? And if you do, my practice again was to treat, to cover for the possibility of Lyme in those situations. Okay. Now, if you are looking for some testing that might help give you some clues, I think your Lyme Western blot was negative from IGeneX. The other thing that you might want to take a look at is to do a test from Armin Labs, which is called an ELISpot. Okay. And what an ELISpot does, it's another way to look to, could you have Lyme in you? And what it's doing is looking to see, do your white blood cells, a type of white blood cells called T cells, remember being exposed to Lyme? All right. So T cells are what our body uses to actually attack germs. And what happens in this ELISpot test is we draw your blood, we take out the T cells, we put them in a tube, and then we expose them to proteins from Lyme. And if they have seen Lyme in you, if they remember seeing Lyme in you, they will then release cytokines. And if they release those cytokines, we measure those cytokines, that means that sometime within the last 2 months, Lyme has been in you. Okay. Now, the ability for that test to find Lyme is about 85%. All right. So if Lyme is in you and has been in you sometime in the last 2 months, that test can find Lyme, if it's in you, 85% of the time. That means it is still wrong 15% of the time. Okay. But, in situations like this, sometimes when it gets tricky trying to figure out, what we're looking for is clues that might help guide us to treat the right germ. And so one thing that if you haven't done this with your provider yet, you might want to talk with them about is getting the ELISpot through Armin Labs. I would not do the ELISpot through IGeneX. That's called an IGX spot through IGeneX. And that is because their own in-house testing about the how good their test is shows that I think it only finds Lyme if present about 35% of the time. For some reason, the way that they're doing the ELISpot through IGeneX does not seem to work as well as what the technique that is done through Armin Labs. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Trevor. I hope that gives you some insights. Hello, Natalie. Hi, Marty. Thanks so much for sharing a free downloadable copy of your anti-germ action plan. I want to show everyone. So you're welcome, Natalie. I'm going to come back to your question here in a minute. I forgot to do something here. And while I'm doing it, I'm going to show everyone something too. Okay. So let's do a screen share here. Okay. So for those of you that want to get a free copy of my Lyme disease guide or book called Anti-Germ Action Plans for Lyme Disease, you can now sign up to get a free copy down here at the bottom of my website. Okay, get our free book and daily health tips. Okay, so give me your email address, and if you are not part of my newsletter email system already, once you sign up, you'll get a copy of the book. Okay. If you have been a subscriber to my Treat Lyme newsletter, look at your email today. I sent everyone that is a current subscriber to my Treat Lyme newsletter an email today where you can download my book. Okay. So I want you to hear that. If you're already a subscriber and you try to add your email here, it's going to tell you you're already subscribed. So for those people that have not yet, that are already subscribed, I did send out a free copy of my book today. Okay, so what book am I talking about? Well, let's go up here. So right here in this books tab, this is my book, Anti-Germ Action Plans for Lyme Disease. Okay, and in here I describe various prescription and herbal options to treat Lyme and the various infections. This book also includes my treatment protocol, and it includes plans to decrease Herxheimer reactions as well too. Okay. All right, so and so that's what you would get in a downloadable form. If you're a person that doesn't want to do it that way, what you could do is take a look at this Kindle version, which you'll have to pay for. or an Amazon paper book, which you would have to pay for as well too. Okay. All right. Let's see here. All right. So let me go back here. Oh, two other things. All right. So I mentioned earlier about fixing mitochondria in the last question. All right. So if you want to know what to do about that, take a look at this article called Power Up Energy and Mitochondria. Okay. All right. The other thing we talked about, I briefly mentioned, was a detoxification problem that treating it seems to be helping Trevor. And that's a problem called MTHFR and detoxification. And I have a whole article here about that as well too. Okay. All right. All right, Natalie, let's go back to your question here. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for sharing a free downloadable copy of your anti-germ action plan. So that's what I just showed you all, how you can get a copy of it too. But again, if you are subscribed to my newsletter already, look at your email from earlier today. I did send out a link about how you can download your free copy of the book as well too. Okay. All right. So you're welcome, Natalie. Let's see. I have untreated PCR positive Lyme. MCA, mast cell activation syndrome, I believe is what you mean by MCAS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS, autoimmune, etc. I have just found out that I have a heavy yeast growth in my sinuses. I have constant dizziness and would like to see if treating this chronic yeast infection could cure it. How can I use your Kills yeast chapter to address an infection in the sinuses? I don't have any yeast issues elsewhere in my gut, genitals, or orally, just in my sinuses. I rarely get the sinus mucus coming out, but when I do, it is incredibly thick and sticky, so obviously very gunky up there. I've tried colloidal silver, xylitol, EDTA, nasal sprays, and I've used a nasal nebulizer with nystatin in the past. I react to a lot of oral drugs and supplements, including probiotics, due to the multiple chemical or the mast cell activation syndrome, but am taking 50 milligrams of fluconazole for 7 days currently, as well as long-term Biocidin LSF and Allicin Max. Okay. Boy, that's a tough question, Natalie. So my treat Lyme, my Lyme how to kill yeast guide, if you will, or kills yeast a brief guide, is more oriented towards treating intestinal yeast overgrowth. Okay. All right. What I can describe, and this is something you're going to have to talk with your providers about, when I did have patients that had nasal yeast, okay, yeast up in the sinuses, a couple of things there's some things that I would like to do for that. Okay. One is, I liked a person to be on an oral agent that could treat yeast. And what I would tell you is we're starting to see a lot of resistance. At times we're having resistance of candida yeast to diflucan. And so in situations like this, I often would not use diflucan. I would use something called itraconazole. It's in the same family of anti-yeast medicines, but seems to be a little stronger or has less chance of having yeast resistance. Okay, so that's a pill that a person would take that actually can treat intestinal yeast, but also can work through the bloodstream up into the sinuses. Okay. Second thing I would like to do is to have a person also on a nasal spray. You're using it with a nebulizer, which is great too, of an agent that's going through the nose that can also treat yeast. Okay. And the things that can do that are nystatin, diflucan, and something called amphotericin B. Okay. Now, and even itraconazole you can do as a nose spray as well too. They have to be made up by a compounding pharmacist. Okay. Colloidal silvers I just have not found to work that well. Xylitols and those things I just did not find to work that well. Okay. So generally I would have a person on an oral agent. And if diflucan is not working well enough, I would look at using itraconazole, 100 milligrams. Top dose would be 200 milligrams one time a day. Okay. And then to also go through the sinuses, then I would either do nystatin nasal spray or itraconazole nasal spray or amphotericin nasal spray or itraconazole nasal spray. Okay. And of those, the one that probably has the greatest chance of getting rid of yeast is the amphotericin. Amphotericin is manufactured only for intravenous administration through the arm, okay? But a compounding pharmacy can mix it up either into a pill form or can mix it up into a nasal spray version. And it would tend to be that is what I would wind up using in situations like this. I often would do an itraconazole pill along with an amphotericin nose spray. Amphotericin, in my experience, seems to work about 95% of the time. It is the medicine I would use for intestinal yeast or even nasal yeast if nothing else was working, okay? I would reserve it as kind of my last option, but I found it to be very useful in situations like that. So these are some things you'll have to talk with your physician about, okay? All right. Let me see. I want to see if I might have some information. I have to look. Bear with me here. I'm going to try to see if I have some information about how to do those as a nasal spray here. I'm not sure if I can't remember if I do or not. Where I'm going to look here. Let's look over here. No, that's not what I want. Trying to think of where I might have put that. Here, let's do it here. Okay, so sometimes people with mold toxin illness also get too much fungus living in their nose. And fungus, yeast are a type of fungus, okay? And I think in this article, I talk about what to use for nasal. No. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a good source here describing what the strengths are for those various sprays, okay? But any physician should be able to talk with their compounding pharmacy to talk with them about some dosing ideas on the amphotericin as a spray or even itraconazole as a spray as a means of helping to get rid of this too, okay? All right. So talk to your physician, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Natalie. Hello, Chris. Let's see. I live in Tennessee, and 2.5 years ago, my health deteriorated. Not long after, 4 ticks were found in the house, 2 fully engorged. It started with dizziness, fatigue, head pressure, pounding heart, not fast, just pronounced akin to someone turning the volume up on a radio. My PCP only thought I had the signs of fatigue. I found a PA who treats Lyme and been on and off Banderol and Cemento. Through her 1.5 years ago, I tested negative for Lyme through Western blot, but positive for Bartonella. The report also said significant Borrelia burgdorferi proteins were detected, presumptive evidence of probable exposure. Since finding you, I've started Sida and Houtenea. I've improved, but still struggle with equilibrium, off-balance issues, sensitivity to lights, fatigue, and occasional pounding heart. I also experience drooping and pulsating eyelids, especially the left. Is this a direct symptom of Bartonella or stemming from a Herx? I'd like to talk to my PA or find another doc and start antibiotics. Thoughts. Very much appreciate the experiences and resources you share. All right. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. So to answer your question, could twitching and pulsing and drooping of the eyelids be a Bartonella symptom? The answer is yes, it could be. Okay, so drooping of the eyelids may mean that the nerves that are supposed to make the muscles work, that keep the eyelids open, are not working well. And both Lyme and Bartonella can affect that. Also, various neuropathies, nerve dysfunction can occur from Bartonella. They can occur from Lyme as well, too. So could Bartonella be part of this? Possibly. Okay, all right. The other thing that you might want to take a look at, and this is just because of your occasional pounding heart and fatigue, you might take a look at the symptom list of Babesia symptoms to see if it is possible Babesia might be part of this or not, okay? there's not enough here in what you wrote for me to be able to say that, but the fact of the severe fatigue and pounding of the heart, those sometimes can be associated with Babesia. It doesn't mean you have Babesia. I want to be very clear about that. So you want to take a look at the article I have about symptoms of Babesia to see if there's enough there to suggest that Babesia might be part of this for you as well too. Okay, Babesia can be one of those things that if it's missed can be a leading cause of severe fatigue. Okay, Babesia also can cause some dysfunction in your vagal nerve function. Vagus nerve is the nerve that controls your heart racing or skipping, your blood pressure. Okay, keep in mind Lyme can affect that nerve too, but I'm just saying it's possible. All right, so I'm going to do a quick screen share here for you to take a look at. All right, so let's see here. In the how to diagnose section of my online guide, take a look at this article called It Could Be Bartonella Babesia, the Symptoms and Signs, okay? And go through the list of Babesia symptoms and just see, are there enough of those to consider Babesia or not? Bring that list to your healthcare provider and see if they'll help you look at that too, okay? All right. Good luck to you. Let me go back here. All right, Chris, I think I answered that question for you. Okay, good luck to you. All right, hold on here just a minute, Ruth. Okay, let's see. I have diffuse pain in both my, hi Ruth, by the way. See, I have diffuse pain in both my legs, but all of my arthritis is only on the right side. My right knee, right hip, right hand, and elbow at times. Is this normal for a Lyme patient, or does it point to a co-infection? So, in my experience, people with Lyme, often things are going to be on both sides, okay? But that's not always the situation. There are some patients that I did treat that would have a more predominant sidedness of their symptoms, either a left side or a right side, for instance. Is it suggestive of anything? Not necessarily. I mean, it could be part of a Bartonella, it could be part of Lyme, it could be part of anything. So, but just to point out that, yeah, sometimes people with Lyme disease and co-infections will have some kind of sidedness, right-sided more than left-sided more of their symptoms. Okay, that is something that can sometimes occur. Okay, all right. Good luck to you, Ruth. Thank you. Hello, Richard. Let's see. I've been on antibiotics for almost 4 years with enough variety and quantity to kill a stable of horses. I've also done antifungals and antiparasites for long stretches. While I have improved my main symptoms, systemic nerve issues will not go away no matter what I do. What gives? Okay. So when I've got somebody that I was treating it and they had done tons of antibiotics, as you described, and basically done enough to poison about anything, and somebody still had a lot of symptoms, I would start thinking about, what do I need to repair? Okay. In other words, it's possible that when germs are out of us or under control, that they created damage, and that's that damage to our nerve membranes or damage to the mitochondria membranes that continues to cause problems. All right. And so one of the big things that can continue to cause problems is from having all those infections. There's a group of what are known as oxidizing agents made by the immune system. Those oxidizing agents can damage cell membranes. Cell membranes are made up of a double layer of fat, okay, including our nerve membranes, all right? The other thing that they can do is they can damage the mitochondria membranes, all right? And mitochondria are the energy factories that are found in every one of our cells. And if they get damaged by all these excess oxidizing agents, then the mitochondria don't work correctly, and therefore it becomes difficult for the cells to heal, the body to heal, okay? All right, so there's a couple things I like to do for mitochondrial repair that I found helpful in my practice, and nerve cell membrane repair. One is to work with the fats, to take the fats that make up the covering of your mitochondria and also make up your cell membranes. And a product that does that is something that has NT factor in it. There's a various NT factor products. So for instance, Research Nutritionals has something called ATP Fuel and something called NT factor. They both have NT factor in them. My preference always was to work with the NT factor. I just found it to work better in my opinion, okay? And so the way you can use that to repair your mitochondria membrane as well as the cell membranes, and kind of think of this as fixing them from the outside, is to take NT factor, phospholipids, 2 pills, 3 times a day, okay? There's good evidence that, and you do that for 2 months, then after 2 months, you decrease it down to 1 pill 3 times a day for 4 months, all right? There are a limited studies that show improved energy and improved thinking when somebody does just the NT factor by itself, all right? And then the other thing I'd like to do is to try to promote healing from the inside of the mitochondria and healing from the inside of cells, and that is to use glutathione. I call glutathione the great fixer, okay? It's an antioxidant that is actually made in every one of our cells. Its purpose is to fix injury, okay? And sometimes if our cells are injured and our mitochondria are injured, they basically have exhausted their glutathione. So we have to put more back in. Now, when you're looking to use glutathione, one thing to keep in mind is that glutathione is easily destroyed in the gut, okay? When we take it orally, it can be destroyed in our stomach, okay? So you want to take a variety that has been prepared to get through the gut and to get better absorption. And so you want to do something that's a liposomal glutathione. That means it's microscopically wrapped in fat, okay? Now, Research Nutritionals, who I mentioned earlier, has a liposomal glutathione product. They have done some studies looking at their liposomal glutathione product, and these studies show marked increases in glutathione levels inside red blood cells when somebody takes this kind of glutathione, okay? That suggests good absorption out of the stomach, okay? All right. And the way that I used to like to use that would be to take 5 milliliters of it, which is a teaspoon, 1 time a day. Okay, so think of the glutathione as repairing from the inside. Think of the NT factor as repairing the cell membranes and the mitochondria membranes from the outside. Okay, all right. The other thing to consider adding to that is something called coenzyme Q10, 400 milligrams twice a day. What that does is it helps carry electrons around the mitochondria, so the mitochondria does a better job of generating energy. Okay. Now, you do not want to use coenzyme Q10 in any form if you are treating babesia with atovaquone, which is found in Mepron and Malarone, because atovaquone is deactivated. It doesn't work well when there's CoQ10 around. Okay. All right. Now, it doesn't sound like you're doing that, but I just want to point that out. Okay. All right. Then, if you are a vegetarian, the other thing you want to add to this whole repair thing I'm talking about is something called carnitine. Carnitine is a protein that we get in red meats, and it is a transport protein. It's used to carry fat from the outside of the mitochondria to the inside of the mitochondria, where it can be burned into cell fuel, okay? And if you're a vegetarian, you're not getting enough of that. And what you would want to do is 500 milligrams 2 times a day on that. Okay. All right. All right. So I briefly talked about 2 parts of this earlier, the glutathione and the NT factor, but I'm just going to do a brief screen share here to show you where you can look at all of this in a little bit more detail of what I just said. Okay, so in terms of repairing, take a look at this chapter called Energy and Fatigue. And I'd take a look at this article called Power Up Energy and Mitochondria and see if it seems right for you. Okay, but that is one thing I would wind up doing when I had a patient in my practice that had done lots of antibiotics and just wasn't getting better. I would take a look there. Okay. The other thing I used to like to do is put people on a paleo diet because that can help with repair as well too. So you might want to take a look at this. It's called the best brain inflammation, pain, energy, and detox diet ever. Okay. And then the last thing, that I would consider in somebody that had taken tons of antibiotics and just was stuck and not getting better would be to look at, are there too many yeast in your intestines? Now, I know you've taken lots of antifungals, so the possibility is not necessarily there, but you may want to take a look, just make sure, take a look at the article that I have written about how to diagnose yeast, just to see, could there be too many yeast in your intestines? And the issue is with too many yeast is if that you do have too many yeast in your intestines, the immune system will see them and it triggers the immune system to keep manufacturing cytokines, okay? And cytokines basically are inflammatory chemicals that are made by the immune system, and they're made in excess when we have Lyme in us. And it's these excess cytokines that give us most of what we call Lyme symptoms, okay? So the symptoms of not thinking well, low energy, body pains, etc. That's all too many cytokine symptoms, all right? And so if there's something else triggering too many cytokines, it can make you feel like you're not getting better as well too, okay? So take a look at that. One other thing to consider that you may want to take a look at is if somebody's not getting better, I would always want to look to see, are there other things triggering cytokines? I just talked about yeast. One of those other things that can trigger cytokines that people sometimes will miss is having ongoing problems getting mold toxins out of them if they've ever been exposed. So you want to take a look and see, is there a possibility you could have mold toxin illness triggering your problems too, okay? What happens in mold toxin illness is 25% of people, when we breathe in or drink in mold toxins from our environment, we cannot get them out. We lack the genetic programming to be able to get them out. And then those excess mold toxins trigger too many cytokines to be made too, okay? So I'm going to show you a couple other things to take a look at too. All right, so I'm gonna look here because I think this may be a good starting point for you to take a look at. There's an article that I posted. I guess it's not here now. I'm trying to see where you can find it here. Just a minute. In my chapter called Can't Get Better, Do This, take a look at this article called Lyme Lookalikes Blocking Recovery. All right. And that's where I talk about yeast. I talk about mold toxin illness, but this would be a good starting point for you to take a look at as well too. Okay. So take a look at this article and then again, consider doing some things to do mitochondrial repair as well as cell membrane repair. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Richard. Hello, Mike. Let's see. Trading long rides in the sun for short rides in the rain. Say it ain't so, Marty. I think what Mike may be referring to is that many of you may be aware that I was having problems with my medical board over my handling of treating Lyme and some prescribing issues that they had with me. And so they had opened up an investigation that reviewed 20 patients in my practice, 20 medical records. And I thought they had decided they really wanted my license and they were going to pull it. But anyhow, the medical board, about 2 weeks ago, I got notice that they had concluded their investigation about my Lyme disease practice and had found nothing wrong. Okay. So that opens the possibility of me returning back to practice. And one place that I could do that would be in Seattle, Washington. So Mike is talking about ending my motorcycle rides here in Austin, Texas for rides in the rain up in Seattle. And the answer is, yeah, I'm considering it. I haven't made up my mind yet what I'm going to do. I've got to have some further discussions with my legal team as to whether it's smart for me to go back there or not. But it's a possibility. Anyhow, thanks for that question, Mike, or that comment, actually. Yeah. All right, this is from Mike too. Let's see, are biofilms the biggest problem we face in chronic excess cytokine producing illness? Huh. You know, Mike, I don't, there's a lot of problems that people face in an illness that where there's just too many cytokines being made. Some of that is the germs. Sometimes it is biofilms blocking treatment. The other thing that can sometimes interfere with our antibiotics working, and therefore we cannot get rid of these germs that keep triggering cytokines, is the ability for Lyme to develop into what are called persisters. And in fact, perhaps the biggest reason people may not be getting better out of Lyme is that we haven't figured out an adequate way of dealing with what are called persister Lyme or persister cells. Okay. I would think, as I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, I would probably say persisters is probably our bigger problem here at this point. So persisters, everyone, are forms of spirochetes and forms of cyst that will develop when they have been exposed to antibiotics for an ongoing period of time. Okay. And what happens is these germs, the antibiotics do better killing these germs when the germs are more rapidly growing. But what happens in the persister state is that the germs essentially go into hibernation. They basically stop responding to the antibiotics. They slow their metabolism way, way down. And basically they kind of go to sleep and they can ignore the antibiotics. All right. And so this makes it hard to get over them. All right. So there's some studies done out of Northwestern University in New England. I'm sorry, Northeastern University in New England, that showed that around 20% of spirochetes and 20% of cyst have the ability to turn into these persister cells. Okay. Now, there's various ways that people are looking at trying to figure out how do we get those persisters out. And I have written a whole article about ways that could be effective. Two of the newer ideas came from, or a number of the newer ideas. One is to use a anti-leprosy medicine called Dapsone that may help with that. More recently, Ying Zhang, who is a researcher out of Hopkins University, has been looking at various antibiotic combinations that might work. His Petri dish experiments suggest a combination of doxycycline with cefuroxime and Bactrim could work. And more recently, he tried some mouse experiments that showed the combination of a drug called IV daptomycin, which is not Dapsone, daptomycin, IV ceftriaxone, and doxycycline could be a good combination that got rid of persisters in mice. Okay. Now that study has got a lot of people's interest. The trouble is daptomycin is not easily to get your hands on because it's super expensive and it's pretty much reserved for people that have severe skin infections for which anything else is not working. Okay. At this point, it is doubtful insurance would pay for that medicine to be used, as it's going to be called experimental. I think the daily cost of that medicine, when I priced it out before, it's up around $600. I mean, this is not inexpensive stuff. Okay. And so it's very prohibitive to think that people would wind up being able to pay for this. And insurance companies are going to try to do everything they can to block paying for it too. And we don't know that it even works in humans at this point too. Okay. Other ideas that can work on persister cells are to do pulsing of antibiotics, where you do a 2-month on, 2-month off regimen. Essentially what happens is during the period you're off, the germ wakes back up and you start getting more symptomatic, which suggests it's woken back up. And then you go back in and use your antibiotics again for a couple months. Okay. So anyhow, to answer your question, Mike, I would probably look more at this idea of persister cells. And there's a lot of interesting research that's being done in the front right now. And hopefully we'll get some good ideas over time. Okay. All right. I'm going to do a quick screen share here for everyone. All right. So in terms of the persister Lyme, take a look in my infection disease, take a look at this article, How to Treat Persister Lyme, What Works, okay? And this is where I review a number of the ideas that I was just talking with you about. The only thing I need to do, I need to update this to discuss a little bit more about Ying Zhang's current studies, the mouse studies, but this is a fairly up-to-date article other than that, okay? All right. All right. Thanks for the question, Mike. Hello, Virginia. Hi, doctor. I have strep along with Lyme, Epstein-Barr virus, and other infections. What do you suggest doing about the strep infections? Virginia, it's hard for me to say because strep means a number of different things. If you're, I would need to know a lot more details about what else is going on in there too. So in other words, I'm not gonna be able to tell in this kind of a forum, actually. All right. All right. Sorry about that. Hello, Richard. Let's see. What has been your experiences using low dose naltrexone? Doesn't this make your immune system somewhat numb to the pathogens, which could allow them to grow and cause damage unchecked? Okay. So low LDN is low dose naltrexone, everyone. And naltrexone, so anyhow, I've had fairly good experience working with it, actually. Naltrexone is a narcotic blocker. Okay, now what does it have to do with the immune system? Let me talk to you about that. So our body naturally makes its own set of narcotics. They're called endorphins, okay? And endorphins are made to help regulate pain, but they also regulate the immune system, okay? Now, if you block endorphin receptors with a narcotic blocker like a naltrexone, what happens is the brain doesn't like that. The brain sends out a bunch of signals to the endorphin producing cells, telling those cells to make more endorphins. Okay. So one thing that happens when you've got these receptors blocked, you get greater endorphin production. Okay. The other thing that happens is these receptors become more sensitive to the endorphins too. Okay. So what happens is that these receptors get more turned on with the blockade. All right. Now, the reason we call it low dose naltrexone is the naltrexone is actually manufactured as a 50 milligram pill. But we want the blockade of those receptors to wear off. And if we were to give it to you as a 50 milligram pill, those receptors would stay bound by the naltrexone too long and would not wear off, basically. Okay. And so you wouldn't get any of the benefits. So dosing somewhere between 1.5 to 4.5 milligrams a day is enough to give you a temporary blockade, which allows those receptors to become more sensitive to the endorphins that are around and your body to make even increased amounts of endorphins. And it has the benefit of regulating an immune system that is too turned on and attacking a person. Okay. So, Richard, I haven't found Lyme to get worse when I was using low dose naltrexone. I did find for a certain sector of patients where there was the possibility that Lyme had triggered an autoimmune illness, that being on low dose naltrexone was a way of giving them benefit. Okay. All right. So everyone, let me show you an article that you can take a look at later for more information about low dose naltrexone and specifically about how to dose for it as well too. This is information you can show your physician too. You would want to take a look at my section called immune system here. And take a look at this article called LDN for Lyme. Okay. All right. All right. Thanks for the question, Richard. Hello, Byron. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I was diagnosed with Lyme and co-infections in September of 2018. I started on Doxy in October 2018 when my doctor added Malarone and Rifampin for Bartonella and Babesia symptoms in early 2018. Since I have been on this regimen, the neurologic symptoms have improved. Oh, okay. So Doxy, Malarone, and Rifampin. I'm just trying to read back through that. But since I've been on this regimen, the neurologic symptoms have improved, but have plateaued and not getting worse or better. Would you consider this time to start a new regimen, or does it take longer for medications to take effect? My recent lab work with Galaxy still came back reactive for Bartonella, and the IGeneX test for Lyme came back IgM band 41 and IgG bands 41 and 58. It seems the main complaints are still Bartonella related. I started adding Hutania 2 weeks ago, 20 drops once a day to help supplement Bartonella treatment, and hasn't made much difference, but it has amplified some of the BART symptoms when I started adding this. Is there anything you can recommend I should be doing? How do I know the regimen is effective? Does it take more time? Should I consider IV at this point? My doctor also tried switching Doxy for azithromycin and didn't make a difference to the treatment. Any advice would be greatly appreciated because I feel at a loss. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so Byron, all I can do is describe what I would do with somebody in a similar situation like this, okay? And just to give you some things to consider, and you may be aware of some of these already too. But in general, when you're treating Bartonella, if you are on the right regimen that's working, by 2 months into a treatment, you should start seeing some improvement in those Bartonella symptoms. And it sounds like that's what you saw, okay? And an average length of Bartonella treatment, in my experience, wound up being about 4 to 6 months. So you're kind of in that ballpark, okay? Now, if I had a patient that was on that regimen, but we plateaued and we just still were having a lot of the Bartonella symptoms, then I might think about changing up my Bartonella regimen to a different one, okay? All right. And so you may want to take a look at the Bartonella regimens that I talk about in my How Do You Treat Bartonella article. But if you are having significant Bartonella symptoms, as you suggest, and that, based on what you're saying here, okay, because I can't tell from what you wrote whether you're still having it or not. But if there are significant Bartonella symptoms still, you may want to look at an alternative regimen to treat that Bartonella, okay? And let me show you what your options are with that too, okay? Okay, so take a look in my infection treatment plan section here, Treat Lyme. And take a look at this article called Kills Bartonella, A Brief Guide. And as many of you know, in here, I describe, I break my treatments down into different treatment tiers. Tier 1 is rifampin-based treatments, which is what you've been doing, okay? There are also Bactrim-based treatments, and I talk about those here, which you have not been doing yet. There are fluoroquinolone treatments. Again, now the only trouble with fluoroquinolones is they sometimes rarely, Cipro rarely can lead to tendinitis that can sometimes be acute, sometimes becomes chronic and doesn't go away. Levaquin in particular has more of that problem. So these are ones I tended to shy away from using in the last years of my practice, unless there was nothing other option that I had, okay? You could also take a look at working with the tier 2 approaches, which would be to use a macrolide along with a tetracycline, and I describe that here, okay? All right. It's not like you've added in Hutania, but if you've added Hutania, my preference that I found effective in working herbally would be a Hutania plus a Siddha Akuta, okay? And I describe that here too. All right. Good luck to you, Byron. Hello, Jeannie. Let's see. How can we best repair damaged mitochondria? Okay, Jeannie, I think we talked about that earlier. Take a look at the article called Power Up that I showed everyone earlier about how do you repair mitochondria. Okay. Let's see. Hi, Leo. Let's see. What is percent of your patients reach stable remission and for how long? All right. So in my practice, I found that I could help about 80 to 85% of people reach some form of remission. Okay. Now, I have to admit that may mean that some people got all the way well, and that there is another group of people that still had some significant symptoms even when they got to a better place because of perhaps from damage that had been created by the Lyme germ. But that probably about 80 to 85% is what my experience was. The remissions could range ongoing. I had some people that I didn't see have relapses, but my experience, especially with chronic Lyme, is that over the course of about 5 years, most people would have some form of remission, unfortunately, or relapse, unfortunately. The thing about relapses, though, is that often they could be turned around with 2 to 4 months of going back on antibiotics once we determine that a person really was in a relapse. Okay, so my experience with relapses is that they are not as nasty of a problem, if you will, as the 2 or so average years of treatment that somebody needs to get them into some form of remission. Okay. The other thing that's important to keep your person in remission, or to keep it so that if their relapse occurs, it's not a severe relapse, is to do the various steps that I described to stay in remission. Okay. And I've gone over that a number of times in the last couple of weeks, but I'll show you an article you can take a look at that you could look at later that will give you the steps to stay in remission as well too. All right, and so you'd want to take a look at this article called Relapse, or this section called Relapse, and then take a look at this article called Finished and How to Prevent Relapse, okay? The other thing that I would point you out to is this article called Is It a Lyme Relapse? Take These Steps. Sometimes what looks like a relapse is not a relapse. And the biggest thing that can mimic a relapse is getting too many yeast growing in your intestines, because they trigger too many cytokines to be made by the immune system, and that can have the appearance of a Lyme relapse. Okay? All right. All right. Thanks for the question, Leo. Hello, Brenda. Let's see. I have Lyme disease and I have a hard time digesting my food. I have food and medicine sensitivities. I also have had shingles several times. Thanks for your help. Brenda, it's hard for me to say where to go with this. There's too short of a synopsis. You might take a look at my article on mast cell activation syndrome, given the type of food sensitivities that you're having, okay, as a means of helping to look at ways that you might deal with that. And then in terms of food sensitivities, also, you might want to take a look at the articles that I've written on an elimination diet, okay? Now, there may be many other things you should do, but your question just has me think to take a look in those two directions, okay? All right, so let me just show you those two things. All right, so take a look in the immune system chapter. So when somebody's got a lot of sensitivities, sometimes that can mean that your allergy cells called mast cells are just too turned on. And that's called mast cell activation syndrome, okay? And these cells can get turned on and become too reactive to things we eat, or to things from the environment. And chronic infection, we now know from Lyme, can actually trigger those mast cells to be too active, okay? So take a look at that article about it, okay? And then in terms of the elimination diet that you might want to take a look at my section on nutrition here. Take a look at this diet called an elimination diet. An elimination diet is a type of diet you can do that strips out and removes anything anyone might have ever been sensitive to, and then you slowly add them back in to see which ones are really causing you a problem, okay? And there's resources here on how to go about doing that, all right? I even give you a food plan to use if you hit that download there, and I give you, there's a guide that describes it in great detail, and you can download it there too, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Brenda. Hello, Mark. Let's see. Hello, Doc Marty. We have been celebrating since we heard the news. Congratulations. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. And hello to your partner there too. Okay. All right. Hello, Vanessa. Let's see. Is it safe to supplement with CoQ10, manganese, and copper while treating Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella with antibiotics and Mepron? I understand I cannot take Mepron and CoQ10 at the same time. It appears they compete for the same space in the mitochondria, I think. Okay. So, Vanessa, the only thing I see a problem, so manganese and copper, I do not think are a problem in terms of treating Lyme to be on those. Okay. All right. CoQ10, if you are on if you're treating Babesia using atovaquone, and atovaquone is Mepron, okay? But atovaquone is also found in another Babesia medicine called Malarone too, just keep that in mind. It interferes, the CoQ10 does interfere with the correct functioning of the atovaquone. So the CoQ10 you should not use if you're on an atovaquone medicine, okay? But that's the only contraindication I see, okay? All right. Thank you for that question. All right, everyone, that is it. As I said, I started out the night kind of really tired, and I've gotten more tired, and I'm going to need to call it quits here for tonight. I didn't get a good night's sleep last night, which is what the problem is here, but hopefully I have a good night's sleep ahead of me. We will do another one of these webinars next week. Tomorrow morning, you will get an email from me somewhere around 9:30 a.m. Central Standard Time. And you can use the link in that email to sign up for next week's webinar. All right? All right. Nice seeing everyone here tonight, and good luck to everyone.